All right, this is Chris at Infinite Realities, and we are live with the great, the legendary Mr. Walt Simonson. How are you, sir?
I am just fine, and suddenly, now that we're starting, my little dog was patting around my feet, but now he's gone back to his bed, so I think I'm good.
That's okay. We had Allison Son and Adam Hughes on, and they
have enormous dogs. My dog is about like this big, so a whole different deal.
Like I said, dogs are welcome. So if the dog wants to take part, absolutely. How are you doing?
We're doing fine. We're just staying low, trying to get some stuff done. I will say I seem to be working at about 1/3 to 1/4 speed these days. I'm napping a lot more than I used to, but that may just be because I'm old. That may not be because of the coronavirus. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I am actually, I'm doing some commissions, which I really have never done. I used to some in the 70s, but not many. And I just haven't done. I've had too much work. And now I still have some work that's kind of come drifting in, but I've agreed to do a few commissions, and I'll see how that goes. Generally, I like telling stories more than I like doing individual drawings, although covers are a lot of fun. That's part of your story, really. But we'll see how it goes. I'm kind of making a test run right now on commissions, and I'm full up. If you're out there wondering if you should do them, don't get a hold of me. I am full up at the moment for as many as I want, and I'll just kind of see how that works out.
Well, I hope
that's what I'm doing. I'm doing that, and I've got a couple of one potential job that I can't really discuss that may actually end up being, I may do, and a couple of covers that I'll probably have to get done as well.
Well, as I said, I'm a huge fan of your work, and when I reached out to you to schedule this, I immediately went home and picked up my artist edition.
I have several.
So the first Thor artist edition. So I re-immersed myself in all things Walt Simonson this week, and
I'm really sorry. I'm sorry you had to do it.
No, I'm not. So you have a very storied career, and I'm going to go ahead and start with one question in particular because it's a family-related question. My brother David Brennaman, his all-time favorite character is Beta Ray Bill, and I was told that I would be in trouble if I didn't ask. His question was, did you know that you had gold on your hands with Beta Ray Bill?
Nobody knows that stuff. You can create characters you think are going to be gold. There was a character that someone created in comics. His editor didn't like the character and was looking forward to seeing the character disappear when the guy got off the book, and it turned out to be a very enormously popular character. I'm being deliberately vague, but that's what you can't tell. And also, you got to remember, 83 was when I began doing Thor for Marvel, and in 83, there were comic shops, but there weren't the kind of reprints that we have now. That stuff was just maybe getting underway by 83, not much. By 84, 85, 86, Marvel was doing, somewhere in there, a little later, maybe Marvel was doing some reprints. Oddly enough, a lot of the early reprints were from Tom DeFalco and Mark Grunwald, who were the editor-in-chief and assistant editor at Marvel. Wonder how that worked out. But they were beginning to do pay. There had been those Stan Lee volumes, the hardcover volumes, Marvel's Greatest Stories, or Marvel's This, Marvel's That, whatever they were. But there weren't a lot. And so even in 83, when I first invented Bill and wrote and drew the story about him, that one was really, comics just appeared 1 month on the stands and disappeared the next. By that time, you could go to comic shops and get them. When I got started in the business, there were no comic shops. So comics were very ephemeral. But you could find them, but you didn't really create much that you thought, at least I certainly didn't, that I thought, oh, wow, this is going to be gangbusters 35 years from now, 40 years from now. I don't think that far ahead. I don't think that far ahead now, whatever I'm doing right now. I'm not thinking, how's this going to look in 40 years? Well, in 40 years, I'm not going to care. But basically, you just have no idea. And sometimes you create a character that you think is going to be gangbusters, and it's just not. And other times, I think Wolverine was a bad guy on an issue of the Hulk, 171 or whatever it was.
Oh, yeah, 181,
181. And I'm sure that, was that Len and Herb had no idea that the character was going to have a half-life far beyond the rest of us mortal men. So you just do, you do the best you can. It's nice when stuff catches fire. but mostly you don't do it with the idea that this is going to catch fire and you're going to be right about it.
Let me ask you this. You've talked about how you've gotten into comics. My question is, why comics? Why this medium to choose to be a storyteller?
Because I like storytelling. I like drawing. And it's one of the few places where you can really do a lot of drawing and tell a lot of story. What I found, I told Howard Chaykin once that comic books is illustration with the addition of the element of time. And I find that element of time, that addition of the element of time, that's one of the things I really love about comics. I love manipulating time. I love trying to pace the reader. I love trying to design pages. There's so much that goes into it. It's kind of a complicated series of problems that you have to work out, that you can think about. And one of the nice things about comics is you can suck at some stuff, but if you're good at some other stuff in comics, you can make a living in comics. You can do comics. You don't have to be good at everything. And there are plenty of people out there, myself included, who are not good at everything, but we're pretty good at some stuff. And one of the things I think I'm good at is putting pictures together in a timely sequence that tells a story and designs a page at the same time. Part of that is that in art, in general, what I really like is, and I saw this actually, there was a big Picasso show in New York 35, 40 years ago, a long time ago now. There were two big shows, actually. And in one of them, there were these great big, I can't make my hands wide enough so the camera will, it's about twice this wide. It was really huge. These big pencil drawings of fields, of like stubble, and they had fields that had been cut down but had not been plowed under yet. And they were in pencil. They were across the hall, and you had a high horizon line and all this stubble and maybe even a little haystack, something. I don't remember for sure anymore. But when you stood back from it, you really got the three-dimensional sense of the landscape. You could see the landscape before you, could see the horizon off in the distance. And when you walk up really close to it and really, close enough to make the guards nervous about what you were doing. I mean, they were, you took a look at it and you just saw all the marks. You saw the pencil marks of him just, I can imagine him just going all over the page, creating this drawing. So what you really had was two things at work. You had the three-dimensional quality of the drawing that let you see the scene, even in black and white, even in pencil. It see the depth of the horizon, the depth of the landscape. But you could also see the surface of the paper that had all these marks on it. And that tension between the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional is one of the things I love most about art. There are painters like N.C. Wyeth, who often does very heavy painting, or Mead Schaefer in his earlier work. You can really see the paint on the surface of a canvas, but you can also see Captain Blood or Robin Hood or whatever you're supposed to see, and the depth of the forest. So when I do comics, I'm trying to kind of achieve that. I want you to have the storytelling. I want you to have the three-dimensional sense of the drawing, but I also want you to have the design of every panel and every page is a collage, and all these different images fit together to make it. So it's always interesting to solve those problems. They haven't yet gotten dull. When I got into comics originally, I thought I'd be in comics maybe 4 years, maybe 5. I'd know all I knew that there was to know about comics. I'd have to go get a real job. And Neil Adams rarely fails to tease me about that, because I made the mistake of telling that to Neil once, up at his studio in Continuity. But so far, I have not figured out all there is to figure out about comics. So I'm still doing them. After I figure it out, I'll have to get, at my age, I'll have to get a job at McDonald's or something. But at least so far I'm good.
Here's the thing, though. Not only you are obviously still learning about comics, but you're also discovering new things you can do with comics. What came to mind is something you said: you can manipulate time with comics. You literally incorporated that into a Fantastic Four story.
I did.
And I remember the first time I read that, it was Reed and Doom battling through time. And the first time I read it, I was so confused until I realized, oh no, wait a minute, they're fighting through time. I have to follow their progression through time.
Hey, there you go. Well thought out. Well, I will say, I hadn't really planned to explain it in the comic, but my wife, who is one of the best editors comics ever had, so no, you have to explain what you're doing. So if you go to the letter column of that issue, there is a paragraph in the letter column that explains what I'm doing. But I didn't want to spoil it too rapidly, so the type in that box is upside down. So you have to turn you won't read it by mistake. You have to turn the comic around and read it. And it explains you have to really read the comic. I think twice. Once through the regular sequence of time with the Thing and the rest of them battling, and then once with reading Doom, where you're bouncing all over the comic, kind of like a choose your own adventure book.
What kind of work went into planning that? Because again, I want to point out to people, if you haven't read this Fantastic Four issue, they're battling at the edge of each page, but it's not in sequence.
No, it's the pages are chronologically arranged, and in the lower corner, I forget the right-hand corner, I don't remember, there is a little digital clock. Mm-hmm. So it starts at like 1 a.m. or in the morning or whatever it is, and then it goes through, every page is a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes after the previous page. And it goes all the way through consistently through the comic. Even the cover has a number it starts about 20 minutes before the actual fight. So the entire comic is numbered sequentially in minutes through it. And then what I did was 2/3 of each page is the current time. And the last third, which would be on this side, I guess, in the camera, I'm not sure which way I'm coming out on this. There's a long strip that goes down the page. And in that strip, there are usually 2 drawings of Doom and Reed fighting. And at the bottom, there's a little clock there. What's happened is Reed and Doom have put on little semi-autonomous belt time machines that enable them to jump through time a minute or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 at a crack. Not like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but it's something brief. So they basically start to fight, and then right as one's about to get clocked, he jumps in time. The other guy follows him, they fight, they jump in time again. And so that fight goes back and forth through the entire comic. And you look at the little number, you have to read through the regular chronology, and then you read the fight. The fight starts on the second page, a double page spread. And then when they jump, there's a little time clock there, and you go find that time clock on the page in the comic. And then you read that strip. At the bottom of that strip, there's another time clock. You have to go back through the comic and find that time in the regular time, and then read the strip of the fight itself. It goes back and forth. In the originals, when I was doing that, I'm not too sure where the idea came from. Maybe I'm kind of like choose your own adventure books, where you hop from different pages, you pull what page to go to. You have a couple of choices. In my case, there are no choices. You just go and follow the flow. It is all chronological in both in the modern time, in the current time, and in the jump time. But they're separate. You have to follow each thread separately. So what I did was I laid that book out on layout paper. And initially, I think all the chronology, all the regular time, and all the Doom and Reed stuff. And then I cut the layout. It was full size, 11 by 17, so 10 by 15 for the art side. Mm-hmm. And then I cut the third of the page off with the Doom Reed fight in it. And I laid all the other sheets, the regular chronology, out on the floor, actually, in our living room. It's wide enough to hold all 22 pages. And then I started laying the strips down and moving them around on top of the pages with the Thing and the current time, until I could figure out the best sequence to have them thread through normal time. And once I got that squared away, then I taped everything down so I wouldn't lose my order. And I traced off all the regular time onto artboard and the drawing board. So every one of those pages is 2/3 of a page has the current time on it, chronologically through the issue. Then there's a material used to be made, I think not anymore, called Craft Tint, or there were other brands as well, which was a kind of board. If you ever look at the old newspaper strip, Buzz Sawyer by Roy Crane, or if you look at a lot of Wallace Wood's work, they both use that. They were masters of it. The page itself, the paper itself, has a couple of patterns in it, like a hatch and a crosshatch. You don't see them normally, but if you have they have 2 little liquids that look like little bottles of water, but they're some kind of chemical, and you dip your brush in it, and when you run it across the board, right where the liquid touches, all those little invisible lines turn brown. So you get a little brown stroke through it, or a brown area, whatever it is. And when they photograph it, that turns black. So essentially, you're creating shading on a black and white page. You go back and look at the Doom Read stuff, you'll see the shading. I did that stuff on craft tint. And then I cut out each third and I rubber cemented those down to the appropriate pages. So in the end, I had one page, but it had 2 layers on it. The layer of the ordinary time, the layer of the time fight. Does that make any sense?
No, it makes no sense. And Matt Miller is still letting everybody.
It was a fair amount of work. It was a fair amount of trying to figure out how this was going to come out. If you're curious, many years ago, some guy at Time Magazine, I don't remember his name now, but he actually wrote a review and an analysis of that issue.
No kidding.
The last few issues of my Fantastic Fours. The original pages, and then we had a lot of illustrations in the book. I think now, last time I looked at it, which is a while back, it was just a copy. They said the copy left. But he actually did, I thought, a remarkably thorough and accurate analysis of what I was doing on that stuff. So if you go to the Time Magazine website and Google my name and the Fantastic Four, maybe you'll find it. Maybe not. I don't know.
Well, following along the comments, Matt Miller points out, for anybody curious, that is Fantastic Four issue 352.
Yes, it is.
We have a question. There you go. Like, he came in with it strong, by the way, immediately. So,
okay.
Jeff Grant is following along. He wants to know, how did you come up with the design for the Manhunter costume?
I can only give you part of it because a lot of it I don't remember. It's probably heavily Japanese influence. When I was working in my apartment back in Brooklyn a million years ago in Flatbush, my very first apartment, I had a large drawing board, the very same drawing board I'm still sitting at, in the drawing board this computer is sitting on now while I'm talking. And I had it set up, and I had a little portable black and white TV, died a million years ago, and I didn't use it for a long time. I used to watch Sea Hunt at 3 a.m, repeats of Sea Hunt with Lloyd Bridges. But I had it sitting up on the drawing board, and I'd be doing stuff. And I was trying to design Manhunter, and Yojimbo was on, the Akira Kurosawa movie with Toshiro Mifune. And if you look at that movie, right in the beginning of it, by the time Mifune, maybe even before he gets to town, when he gets to this really awful town that everything happens in, there's a little kind of bald guy who's running like a town crier. He's got a block of wood and a stick, and he clocks it. I don't know if he's keeping time. I'm not sure what he's doing. But he's kind of a little official running around, kind of a mouse, really. But he has this flared white cowling, or whatever you want to call it, over him. And I thought that was great. Now, the back of it just dropped off in like a little short cape. And in my very first drawing of Manhunter, I gave him that cape. But I eventually decided that was going to be too complex to kind of work with. So I made the cowling symmetrical, so it just tucked in his back, closed off in the back and tucked into his belt. That's where that element came from. Archie, the others I have to kind of guess at. Archie was interested in Manhunter using weapons. So we went through a series. I think my friend Steve Mitchell suggested a Mauser for the pistol. They look really cool. They're not very well balanced as pistols, I don't think. A lot of the weight's out in front of the handle, but they look great. So I don't think Archie had a pistol in mind originally, but in the end he thought, that looks pretty cool. We'll go ahead and use that. So he got a Mauser out of the deal. Gray Morrow, who used to live in the neighborhood I was in over in Brooklyn, about maybe 10 blocks away, a little further. I didn't see Gray often there. I saw him at Continuity, some in Neil's studio. But he had a cast iron life-size Mauser. It was one piece of metal, but a good model. And he loaned it to me, so I was able to use that as my model. In fact, there's at least one shot, because it was all one piece, I didn't understand how the action worked. And so there's at least one drawing in Manhunter where it's incorrectly drawn as far as either the action or I've forgotten what it is. There's something in there. I don't remember what it was anymore, but I used that. Other books, Archie had a book on Asian weapons. And so he loaned those to me. That's where the Qatar, the Bandai dagger came from, that he used once in one of the shows. Throwing stars, initially, 9 was kind of a mystical number, I gather, in Japan. I've not been there, so I may be wrong. But that was my impression from reading. So originally I gave Manhunter 9 throwing stars. He had 6 on 3 each on his chest, on his tunic rather, one on his chest and one each on his wrist gauntlets. And very rapidly, I decided that trying to draw 9 throwing stars in every damn panel was just going to be too much work. So I simplified it down to 2. I thought 2 is going to be enough. And so I don't know where the boots came from. I get asked about those off and on. And somebody just recently posted and said, how's he running those boots? And I just said, you're confusing real life with comics.
We say that in the store all the time. We're right across the street from a high school, and so we get kids coming in who are discovering comics, and they'll come in and they'll say like, well, in this issue it says that adamantium is stronger than vibranium, but in this issue it says that vibranium, which is it? And we go, comics, man.
Take your pick. Yeah, I learned early, one of the first comics I bought was a Tales of Suspense, back when Gene Colan had just started doing Iron Man. And Jack was still, I think, laying out Captain America, and George Tuska was finishing it. Don't remember the issue numbers. I could go find it. Low 80s, maybe 81, something like that. Maybe earlier. No, it's probably 60s. And there was a storyline they were just doing at the time. I came in about the second chapter about the 3 sleepers, which were Nazi juggernauts that had been hidden away in Germany. And now Nazi true believers. Who knew we'd have so many now?
Who knew?
Nazi true believers then. We're going to reactivate these and give rebirth to the Third Reich, or now the Fourth Reich, or whatever it was. And at the end of one of the comics, there's a kind of a fat burger who goes to a statue. And I don't remember which order this happened in, but he goes to the statue and he looks around carefully. And then he reaches over and he turns a letter that's on the base of the statue. And in the next issue, the fat burger is standing in front of the statue, looks around carefully, and pulls out a little box and begins turning a key. Jack forgot what he'd done the previous issues. And I just thought, wait a minute. And I thought, well, I didn't really care. The thing blew apart. The sleeper came out, killed the burger, and took off to destroy, the world. So but I learned early on that if stuff wasn't consistent month to month. Now that I've done comics for a long time, I understand better how that is. And it happens everywhere. I was just watching an episode of The Restless Gun, an old TV Western from back in the 50s with John Payne. And there's one that I kind of like about a fast gun, who, of course, the Restless Gun takes him. But there's a guy, an old man being put on trial. He's a crook. He's a really awful guy, killed somebody. Being put on trial. He's got some gunnies that are going to help him out. But there's a very funny sequence. I'd never noticed it before. I'm watching it, but it's because it's on YouTube. I was able to go back and look at it again. And he's sitting at a table talking. He kind of looks like me. Not a beard, but nothing on top. There's a hat sitting at the desk. And there's a close-up of him as we go, I'm going to have you killed. And then there's a back to the table again. And when you get this close-up shot of him, he's wearing his hat. And then when you go back to the table, it's back on the table. Or back to the table shot. It's back on the table again. I mean, movies are full of that stuff, TV. Most of it goes by so fast, you never see it. And nobody who did that stuff a million years ago ever had any idea it was going to be available until eternity. And you could go back and slow it down and look at it. So on that stuff, it's like adamantium, vibranium. It's your personal choice.
Comics, man.
That's comics, man.
Luca Carver asks, I've always been a big fan of your inking style. What were your influences and what inking tools have you used over the years?
Here's the inking tool. It is the same tool I have used for longer than I've been in. I'll put it in front of my beard. It shows up in front of my beard. It's a Crow Quill pen. It's a Hunt 102 Crow Quill pen. It's a Hunt 102 holder. I have a couple. I have one that I kind of modified from a longer one. It has more reach to it. They've been available since before I got into comics. I discovered them when I was in art school, probably about 1970 or 71, somewhere in 70, 71. I have some work from 70 that is inked with rapidographs, which is what I used to use all the time, which are technical pens like this one. I used it there. It's just a hard metal point. What they are is they're things that a lot of young artists use to start with because they feel most like a pencil. You use one of these, it's a hard point. It feels like a pencil when you're drawing with it. At the same time, it's probably as far away from a pencil as you can get because a pencil, because of the graphite, it responds to your touch. Thick lines, thin lines, light lines, heavy lines, medium lines. The rapidograph gives you one line. And each there are 10 or 12 rapidograph sizes, maybe something like that. 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 4, 00, 000. The very small ones, like 000, is very, very tiny, like a hair. 4 is a little much wider. And so by using different pens, you can kind of emulate the thick, thin look of comics. If you're really nuts, you can do a pretty good job of it. But I used those originally probably because they felt like pencil. Discovered crow quills. They don't feel as much like a pencil, but they're stiff. And so you can press down on it, but it will give you a very thin line or a very thick line. And so I have used those really for my entire career. About 1986, I decided I should learn how to use a brush. I hadn't really used brushes much to fill in blacks, but I ended up, I ended up using, Tom Palmer turned me onto these. It's a Raphael 8404, an 8404. Number 2 or number 3 is what I use all the time. What this stuff here is in the middle, and it was on the pen point as well, on the pen holder. That's just masking tape. What I've done is I have wrapped masking tape around the original holder, which is very slender. I don't think I have an unwrapped one handy, or I'd show it to you. I don't think so. Sorry. I know I'd be giving an art demonstration, but I just wrap, it's about as thick as the back end of it here. And so you wrap this around it as much as you want to your own taste. So it's easier to hold. It's easier to grip, at least for me, rather than something that's very thin. I get better control when it's a little fatter. I have a little more grip to get a hold of it. So I do that to my brushes as well. I use Pelican Ink, Pelican Drawing Ink, Tush A, Tusche maybe, or not. I can't remember if there's an E on the end of it or not. Tush A, which is it's the Pelican Drawing Ink I used, India ink I used from the old days. Maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, it went through a bad patch, and it really sucked. It suddenly became very gray. Wasn't very good ink. I tried a lot of other inks. Never found one I was really that comfortable with the way I was with Pelican. And then 4 or 5 years ago, I said, there's a bottle of Pelican here. I'll just buy it and pick it up. I was at a Dick Blick art store, and I picked it up, tried it, and it worked great. The thing I like about it is it's pretty opaque when you lay out a large area, but it's fluid enough that it runs out of a brush or runs out of a pen just fine. So I use that. That's what I've gone back to. I buy it in 1,000 milliliter jars, and I go through one of those in 3 or 4 years, get another jar, and keep going. If you're just doing this stuff for the first time, here's a tip. I got this from Neil Adams, which had never occurred to me up to the time I was in New York. If you're using a bottle of ink, and I would pick up, this is close. A bottle of ink like this isn't Pelican, but it's some stuff I've used for other things. When you're getting ready to ink with it again, start up, shake it up. Ink settles the carbon or whatever it is, settles the bottom, and you'll do much better if you shake your ink from time to time. I shake it whenever I start a new drawing, once a day. I don't have to shake it more than that. Or I will take my magic pen holder for my crow quill. I will flip it upside down. I'll stick it in the ink bottle, and I'll stir it around. You can feel the sludge down there. So I try to get as much of that stuff up and back into suspension as I possibly can. So if you otherwise, it will turn gray after a while. But doing that keeps it fresh and black. I never knew that. I didn't get that lesson in art school, but I got it from Neil when I came to New York.
I hope that our aspiring creators out there are taking notes, because that is
all pretty simple.
Yeah, but it's invaluable. Again, I don't have an artistic bone in my body, and I felt the need to start taking notes in case I ever. You see, here we go. Walt, to my mind, one of the only truly worthy follow-ups to Jack Kirby's Fourth World was Orion. And what was your approach to staying true to Jack's themes while doing your own thing?
Well, thank you. It's hard to say. I love the Fourth World stuff that Jack did. It might be my favorite Jack Kirby stuff, although I'm obviously a big Thor fan. The Jack Kirby work, I've said elsewhere, I'll say it again now. Years ago, Frank Miller and I were talking. Frank said, we shared studio space, used to many years ago. And Frank said he thought that Jack's Fourth World work was the first independent comic book work. And in a way, I understood what he meant. It is so personal. I mean, Jack wrote it. You can argue that other writers that have written over Jack were better writers. They made the characters more accessible. But there is a quality of Jack's writing by the time he was doing the Fourth World, his work was becoming a little more abstract. And his writing is written to match that. So you get stuff like early on when there's some supporting mortals who kind of drift in for a little while, drift out again. It's, hi, I'm Claudia Shane, girl secretary. I'm Bozo the Clown, financial wizard. I'm this guy. And they all have their names and they all say what they do. It's like they're wearing a hat with a little label on it that says girl secretary or boy financial wizard or whatever it happens to be. And, you know, that way, I mean, it was funny, but it was also very abstract. And some of the characters, they didn't last very long in the strip. They kind of disappeared. Stuff kind of came in, came out. And yet the stuff was so magically inventive, something that Jack was. And it just, every issue just had new and explosive ideas. I remember I was a big Jack Kirby fan. By the time that stuff came out, I had gone through college. What it came out, 70, 71, 70 maybe, 69, something like that.
Early 70s.
I was at the Rhode Island School of Design. And the first issue came out. I knew Jack had gone to DC. And I was very eager to see what he was going to do. And the first comic to come out from Jack from DC was, I believe, a gesture of Jimmy Olsen. I think 3 Jimmy Olsens came out. And then the other books came out bi-monthly, began rolling out. And I can remember that first Jimmy Olsen where Jimmy and the Harrys, or the whatever they were, the motorcycle gang rather, were running down Superman, like that would make a difference to Superman. But they're running him down on the motorcycle. Get out of my way, Superman. I'm now the head honcho of the motorcycle gang, or whatever it was. And I read the comic, and I'd read a lot of comics by then. Completely blew my mind. It was the Harrys, or what the motorcycle gang were called. It was the what was the road called? There was the Zoom Way. It was the Legion of the Legion of Newsboys.
The Newsboy Legion, yeah.
It was the Whiz Wagon.
Yep.
It was the mountain of judgment rolling down the Zoom Way. It was every page was explosive. This giant Tinker Toy log construct in the air that all the Harrys, I think, lived in. It was just nuts. And I was dying to catch the next issue. What the hell is going to happen? What is all this? Or as they say in England, what's all this then? So it was fabulous. So I just loved it all the way through. And there are moments. There's a moment where Orion, he's fought Cattleback through the city of New York and beaten him and chewed up his face pretty good. And he and Light Ray are in the apartment of some young woman that, I guess that's the way it works in comics. Never worked for me. But they're in the apartment of some young woman kind of recuperating a little bit. And finally Orion goes, and she obviously thinks that Orion's really hot. And Orion goes out onto the balcony and he starts screaming. And the panels are full of Jack Kirby crackle as we call it. All that black dots and black texture and lightning and energy. And it's just filling the sky. And he is screaming to Darkseid to show himself, come out of the shadows and show himself. Send me no lesser beasts like Cattleback. And he's just unleashed. And the woman just says, what have I been talking to? And Light Ray just says, what you seem to find fascinating, lady, pure chaos, or whatever he calls it. But it's just an incredibly powerful scene. And I don't know that better writers would have been able to catch that in quite the same way. So Jack, the stuff, I think it just came from the heart. I've said elsewhere, I think that a lot of it was Jack's experience. I think the anti-life equation was his version of fascism.
Right.
They see guys goose stepping on Apocalypse. He was a World War II vet. In fascism, at least according to what I remember from 11th grade, Problems of Democracy, it was the will of the individual was subordinate to the will of the state, which is, sounds good, but it means you have to have somebody representing the state that, it's going to be this guy here that we're going to listen to. Whatever the state, it's not an abstract state, it's always some guy. And so that's really what Darkseid is after. That's what the anti-life equation represents. So I think there was a personal quality about that work that Jack spoke from that was just unmatched anywhere else. I did love Thor. Don't get me wrong. Loved Thor. Sure. So, I'm in comics as much because of the run of Thor from like 116 to 139 as I am for any reason. was that stuff. I bought all the Marvel comics back then once I got started, but that's the stuff I discovered and was completely wowed by. So with the thing about Orion, I just try to, I couldn't even answer your question exactly. All I can really say is that I wouldn't want to do Orion or Thor, or the Fantastic Four, 3 major Kirby books that I've worked on, and just retell the stories that Stan and Jack told, or that Jack told. I want it to feel like that stuff in a sense, but I want it to be my own stories. And that hasn't really been an issue. I think partly because I read that stuff and loved it and absorbed it to a degree. If I never see a Jack Kirby comic again, I will be influenced by Jack for the rest. I have up to now. I will with the rest of my career. There are other artists I go back and look at from time to time. Jim Holdaway, who did Modesty Blaze, a newspaper strip in England, one of my very favorite artists. Mobius, Jean-Claude Mézières from France, Topi from Italy. And I can go back and look at their work and be endlessly refreshed. And Jack stuff, I don't have to refresh myself. No. It's all there, whatever that means. So I read those books, I absorbed them. I just try to tell stories. I mean, Thor, for example, one of the ideas was that in Stan and Jack's Thor, some of the stories were science fiction, kind of pulp science fiction. Mm-hmm. Tananile, the colonizers of Rigel, Ego, the living planet, the high evolutionary. And some of them were quite mythological. The beast, the dragon Fafnir, and the search for the giant Odin sword that was going to crack, was cracking, stuff like that. So, what was his, Cedric the Merciless, whom Odin gave his power to, which was a big mistake. My feeling is, if a guy's named Cedric the Merciless, maybe he's not the one guy you want to give ultimate power to.
It's in there.
Maybe a bad idea. So, I tried in my run on Thor, for example, to do some stories, like Beta Ray Bill came out of that kind of pulp science fiction background. I did a lot of mythological stuff, probably more mythological stuff than science fiction. But I did a time travel story, did some other stuff in there. I loved the tension between looking backwards, as Thor does, to a mythological past, and then looking forwards to the future. So I try to figure out kind of what the books were about, and then tell stories I felt were in that line of country, in that realm of country. And beyond that, I couldn't tell you very much. Other than I tried to absorb as much of it as I could from Kirby's work, and use that to influence my own work without trying to be Jack Kirby. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I were trying to be Jack Kirby, I could probably be a pretty good Jack Kirby, but I would never be more than a second or third rate Jack Kirby. And I'd rather be a first rate Walt Simonson, whatever that means. So I just try to bring what I've learned from those books and put them into the books when I'm writing and drawing them. And I don't think I can say anything clearer than that, really. That's the best I've got.
No, that was fascinating. In fact, we've got comments that back that sentiment up. We're coming to the end of our time here. One thing that I wanted to ask you.
I'll give shorter answers.
No. You're good. One thing about your work, whether it's Thor, Orion, and your recent work with Ragnarok, which, by the way, if you're watching this and you haven't read Ragnarok, why haven't you read Ragnarok? It is phenomenal and fantastic and bonkers and just everything you want. But
thank you.
You do seem attracted to big mythic ideas and working at that. Where does that come from? Why? What is it about mythology that seems
as a kid
to you back?
When I was a kid, my parents had a modest library of all over the map, and one of the things they had was a double volume set of Norse myths and Greek and Roman myths. They were from 1893 or thereabouts, which was not as long ago when I was born as it is now, but it was still a long time ago. And I read them. I read the Norse myths especially, and I loved the Norse stuff. The books were not kids' books. They were, grown-ups. That particular book by, is it H.A. Gruber, I think, has been reprinted 1 billion times. You can find it.
I got that one.
You can find it in remainder stores like all the time. And it's a mixture of, prose, but they quote the poetry, a lot of quotes from the Elder Edda, a lot of quotes from other sagas. It's very funny that in the edition my parents had, which is this old edition, there were glossy black and white illustrations that were bound in that were quite nice, but they were extremely Greco-Roman Norse gods. They had robes and all sorts of stuff with horned helmets, all
Sure.
this stuff that was very much not Norse stuff, but that was okay. But I loved those stories. I said also my grandparents were Norwegian from my father's side. So I don't know if it's actually genetic. I hate to claim that. Sounds Lamarckian somehow. But basically, I loved them, probably partly because the gods all die at the end of this giant confrontation. I mean, it's incredibly epic. The actual poem that talks about Ragnarok, which is not very long, it talks about the beginning and the end, called Voluspa from the Elder Edda. And yet, as short as it is, it's really powerful. It's really, I think, a very strong, powerful piece of Western literature. And so I think I probably get into that stuff pretty early on. I discovered Beowulf early. It was a kid's version of Beowulf in one of my school books in 5th grade. So the idea that the hero died at the end was quite a revelation to me. But I think I learned early about that stuff. I read more about the Greeks as well and the Romans. So that kind of stuff. And I always found that when I got into comics, I began reading comics as a sophomore rather, in college. So I would have been, 19. I love Jack Kirby's work. Jack was my favorite artist. I was Gene Colan, Steve Ditko, other guys whose work I did love and was influenced by to some extent. But Jack stuff, he was able to take to make the biggest visuals out of the most mediocre soil. I don't know how that worked, but it was just fantastic. And that's the stuff that appealed to me. In some ways, it's the stuff I thought comics could do. You could any soap opera could show 3 people in a room or a boy and a girl sitting at a soda fountain talking. Now, of course, you can show a lot in a movie. Of course, it still costs a lot of money to do that. And in comics, it's not expensive. The thing about comics that's funny is it's a pain in the neck to draw somebody walking down a stairway. In a movie, a TV show, easy to film it.
Right.
In a comic book, easy to draw a guy flying through the sun. In a movie, it used to be harder to do that. Now they can do it, but it takes a lot of work. So I think the idea of these big pictures, these big thoughts, these big ideas to put in these comics just appealed to normalcy to me. I was also struck, I was a little older when I found comics, but I also had an experience where I had a book when I was a child. It was a giant golden book, which means it was about so big, bigger than regular golden books. And it was the Iliad and the Odyssey. I don't know, all for children. I don't remember who the author was, but the Provinsons, Martin and, I've lost her name. I'm sorry. Martin wouldn't be, not Diane, Leo, and well. They did the drawings, all based kind of on Greek illustration, Greek vase painting and stuff like that. Very abstract. I loved it. Of course, it's a grim story for the most part. And I loved it as a kid. I read it till it fell apart. My mom, who was a children's librarian for our local school for a while, she repaired it for me. It's got the blue tape on the end she used to fix it. But I didn't see it for many years. And I went back later and found it when I was grown up. Hadn't seen it since I was a kid. And I was astounded at how small it was. It wasn't tiny. It was still like this big. But I remembered it being so large you could climb into it. And it wasn't that big. So it brought home to me, especially when you're a child, how big comics are, how big the pictures are, how big the ideas are, how big the visuals are. And I wanted to capture that. And I did learn pretty early in my comics career. I think when I was doing the Rampaging Hulk, I drew that for 3 issues, the layouts for 3 issues. And I taught myself how to I had to do really large images in comics in order to make them still feel large when they were shrunk down to this. Mm-hmm. And so that's something I worked on, and it always appealed to me. So I think that's probably some of where that stuff comes from.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to have to try to harass you to do this again with us because we've got over 100 people watching right now live, and questions keep coming. So,
you want to give me one more fast question? I'll give you a short answer.
Give you one more fast question. What was it like working on Star Wars in the 80s?
It was like getting a check. You get this question all the time, or you get the question, what was it like to do Jack Kirby comics? And you got to remember, I did Star Wars. The second movie had just come out. It was obvious it was going to do really well. but it wasn't like Star Wars the way it is now. It was just, it was a couple of movies that did well. So they didn't even have the toys out. When that first movie came out, it took almost a year to get the toys, the action figures that now are just everywhere. But back then, it took a year to get them out. So it wasn't like, and the Lucasfilm folks were letting Marvel at that time do pretty much the stories they wanted to do. They would come in once in a while, David Nicolani and I. David's first idea as my regular writer on it, his first idea on Star Wars was, okay, the Empire is going to build a new Death Star, and they're going to put chicken wire on top of the exhaust ports. And Lucasfilm got back to us and said, you can't do that. You can't do that story. We can't tell you why you can't do that story, but you can't do that story. We said, oh, I get it. Movie number 3. So, which, in fact, it was. So we said, how about we do a giant cannon? How about we do a giant cannon floating in space with a concave cannon on the front, this big disc that can blow up planets, not spherical. And they said, okay, that's fine. So we did our Death Star story. David called it the Tarkin, which I thought was a great name for the equipment. And, it was, we had a lot of fun. There was a lot of reference available by that time. By that time, there were books out. There were toys. I had a lot of toys and gizmos, which, because of what I was doing, hey, they were all tax deductible. It was great. But basically, it was fun to do. And it was fun at that time because there weren't a lot of people leaning on you. I think now Star Wars would be, I'm guessing, I've known one in a million years, it'd be harder to do because there's a lot more people leaning over your shoulder watching the continuity. At the time, word was that Lucas, I don't know if this is true or not, the word was that Lucas had said that the movies were gospel, but everything else was gossip. Mm-hmm. And they kind of treated it like that. Now I think that's probably not true with all the Clone Wars and the animations and all of the novels, everything else. I'm sure they're keeping track of all that stuff. But it meant at the time there was a great deal of freedom to do it. So I got to do it when it was free and easy. Had a lot of fun. David wrote some great stories. And Tom Palmer did beautiful finishes over my work. So he was the right guy. His young son, Tommy, was a giant Star Wars fanatic. So Tommy would look over his dad's shoulder and say, you didn't draw the Millennium Falcon correctly, Dad. Okay. So he had an expert consultant right there in the house with him. We had a great time. The end.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. Just to let you know.
That's all right. You got another one coming up.
Saying thank you right now. So
thank you very much. Thanks for showing up, folks.